Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Law. Our podcast, if you're just joining us for the first time, is about how the traditional approach to law is breaking people, because that traditional approach is we feel is very broken. And we really want to be part of that conversation about how people can take those next steps to break free from that traditional approach to the law, and really lean into something that we hope is better. One of the things that we'll continue to focus on throughout the course of this podcast is really talking about creating a working definition around what is better law. Because it's not just enough to say, hey, here's some problems that we have. We really want to help be part of the conversation and seeing, what can be next. So my name is Sam Foreman. I'm one of the co-hosts here on the podcast. I'm the founder of Foreman Law. We do a lot of work with folks who are buying and selling businesses. And my favorite thing in my life currently is that my 2-year-old is experiencing an explosion of vocabulary, and it is fascinating. So, Ashlyn.
Yes. My name is Ashlyn Lindskog. I, like Sam, am an attorney and the founder of a law firm called AB Legal. It is certainly something that I have had a great experience growing and building. I practice in all sorts of areas of law, but generally business, real estate, and estate planning and probate. And let's see, the favorite thing in my life right now, man, if I couldn't pick any of them, but I will do a shout out. My 5-year-old turns 6 tomorrow. So we have a fun-filled day planned of celebrating my oldest baby.
That's great. I thought for a minute you were going to say which was your favorite child.
Oh, I could pick.
So we'll wait till the cameras are off and then you can tell us who your favorite kid is. Jason, make sure that the cameras are still recording each other. So. And we're joined by Gloria Farha Flentje. And want to just kind of, say thank you so much for being here today.
Sure. I
was reading your bio and just in getting to know you, for folks that know Gloria, she's very modest, very humble. But man, I was reading your bio and I'm like, this is awesome. So thank you for being here. I wanted to hit kind of some of the high points here. You started your legal career at Southwestern Bell in 1976. And then you joined Folston Siefken, which for those of our listeners that aren't familiar, that's the largest Kansas-based law firm, where you became partner in 1984. In 2000, you joined Boeing as chief counsel at their Wichita facility, right. Which for anyone that doesn't know what a Boeing is, you really should try flying sometime. You then became vice president, general counsel of Spirit AeroSystems when it was spun out of Boeing in 2005. Then oversaw their initial public offering in 2006. Your career is primarily focused on labor and employment law, but also obviously a lot of business topics and mergers and acquisitions and lots of different things in Spirit. But even beyond your professional achievements, you've been really active in the community and the legal profession, serving on numerous committees and boards, including the Wichita Bar Association's Professional Diversity Committee, Kansas Supreme Court Nominating Commission, the University of Kansas Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity Advisory Board, and the board of the Wichita Foundation. Thank you for all the things that you've been doing. I'm just so impressed. And people have recognized your achievements throughout your career with a variety of awards and recognitions, the Chester I. Lewis Diversity Award and Lifetime Achievement Award from the Wichita Bar Association, and you and your husband, Jack Foch, also received the Donna Sweet Humanitarian of the Year Award. And on top of that, you have you and your husband have a blended family of 5 children and 14 grandkids.
That's true.
So welcome and thanks for being here. I feel like I don't deserve to be in the same podcast with you, but I'm just so grateful that you're here.
No. I'm a has-been.
Oh, no way. No way. What?
Well, by that standard, I'd like to achieve that level as well.
Yeah. What a career. Those contributions are amazing. And just thank you on behalf of the community for your efforts and time. I know that it's not always easy in it, with a busy life and kids. And I'm sure you had just so much free time to contribute to all of those things.
Yeah. I'm curious, what was it like getting started in law practice for you?
Well, let's go back a little before that.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a family, neither one of my parents, well, my father was an immigrant, came when he was 14 to this country, and my mother was she was one of the first children born in this country. Neither went to high school. In fact, my dad, after he came, he went to school for 1 year to learn English and to read and write, and then he started working.
Oh, wow.
So he was a very hardworking man, very successful in what he did. My mother was 16. Well, she went through the 9th grade, and that's as far as she went. And then they got married when I think she just turned 17. And so I came from a very traditional family. Women didn't work. They stayed home. They got married. They had children. And so I kept kind of pushing against the norm in the family. I went off to college. My father said, "You go." He wanted me to go to college. He really valued education because he didn't have any. Something he didn't have an opportunity for. He was the second oldest son of a family of 8, and everyone younger than him went to high school, and his youngest brother graduated from Wichita University. So they thought education was important. It just wasn't available to them.
Sure.
And so then I went off to college, and I graduated from the University of Kansas, and I did some graduate work at KU and worked at KU, and thought I could be something. And I discovered that in 1968, a woman college graduate with a degree in math and international relations who didn't know how to type, because I refused to learn to type, really wasn't sought after in the working world. My first husband and I moved to Washington, D.C., where he went to work for the U.S. Senator from Kansas. And I went to the streets looking for a job, and people would ask me if I could type, and I said no. And they just kind of sat back and looked at me. And I did finally find a good job. But then we left and came to Chicago. And in Chicago, I kind of faced some of the same things. And I decided I had to get a trade. Now, maybe law is not a trade, but I wanted to do something that I felt that people would look at me and say, well, she's capable. And I worked in Chicago at Northwestern University at the National Institute for Education and Law and Poverty. And after all these years, I'm very proud I still remember the name of it.
That's a long name.
Yes. It provided
awesome.
education to legal aid attorneys across the United States. They have federal grant to do that. And I worked for a group of lawyers, and most of them weren't very nice lawyers, to be honest. They were kind of street lawyers in a way, and I was the office manager, and they mistreated the staff terribly. And so I said, I've got to get out of this. And I decided I wanted to go to law school, but I was living in Chicago, and there are no private schools, and we couldn't afford for me to go to one of the public schools, and we couldn't afford for me to go to a private school. Then my husband had an opportunity to go to Southern Illinois University, and they were starting a law school, so we moved there, and I went to law school. And at that point, when I started law school, I had a 3-year-old son.
Oh, man.
And things went fine, and then I finished law school. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have to do something with this degree.
I've been there. I felt that.
What am I going to do? And by that time, we'd moved back to Kansas. We were both from Kansas, and he was working for the governor of Kansas. And I started looking for a job in Topeka. I actually did my last semester of law school at Washburn. They let me take my last semester and transfer it back to Southern Illinois University so I could graduate. So I got done, and started looking for a job. And the first thing that happened was the women in my class at Washburn said, there are no law firms in Topeka that will hire women at this point. So don't go looking at law firms. They're not going to hire you. Said, okay. And my husband was working for the governor of Kansas, who said, I do not believe in double dippers. Because most people went to work for the state. And I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I was fortunate that I took a class. I took domestic law my last semester at Washburn, thinking I'm going to need to know this for the bar. I don't ever want to practice domestic law, but I'm going to need to know Kansas law. So I took that class, and the person teaching it was an attorney at Southwestern Bell. And he said, you ought to apply with Southwestern Bell. They need another attorney. And I did, and I got the job. And so I was really fortunate. In fact, I've always said when people ask me about my career, I said I have been very lucky. You know, some people are smart. Me, I was lucky. I fell into the right place at the right time. So it was good getting into the practice. Now, interestingly enough, the head secretary of the law office at Southwestern Bell in Topeka had been there for 40 years. And she didn't think it was appropriate that there was a woman practicing law. And so you kind of had this feeling like, I got to do it all right. The head attorney, he's called a general attorney, was very supportive. Things went well at Southwestern Bell for 3 years. And then the governor of Kansas had the audacity to not get reelected. And so my husband found a job at Wichita State. And I found myself moving back home because that's where I grew up and had, you know, and I started looking for a job. And I think I'm telling a whole lot more than you probably want to know.
No, this is
perfect.
great.
Keep going.
Yeah.
So I knew some people because of cases we had that were in Wichita. So I knew some lawyers. One asked me to come talk to the electric company. He said, you know, you've got some experience with rate cases, et cetera. He said, you'd probably be great with us. And I said, okay. And I talked to a lawyer at Fulton who I'd known all my life, who said, you should talk to Mike Stout, who is he's the head of our recruiting at this point. Mike Stout, an amazing attorney. And so I went and talked to Mike. Well, Mike is a guy who is just really, you know, he'll tell you what he thinks, and sometimes it's not appropriate, but he says it anyway. So he was they talked to me, and they suggested some places I could interview, and I was interviewing a couple of other places. And he said to me, and I've teased him about it for years, and he's laughed about it. He said, we'd hire you, but you're too old. And I said, what? And I was older because I didn't go to law school till I was 30. So by then I was 36.
So you actually knew something about the world at this point. Yeah.
I think I did a little bit, but, and I was told I should tell you this story. I after I talked to him, I was meeting my sister for lunch. I had driven down from Topeka to come talk to him. And I met her at a restaurant called The Looking Glass on Douglas, and I stormed into the room. My sister's 10 years older than me and had really a great head of black hair. And me, at 36, I was already starting to gray quite a bit. I didn't say hello. I didn't say anything. I said, I'm dyeing my hair. I said, I just talked to them, and he said, the one thing I can't do anything about my age. He said I was too old. And she laughed, and we laughed about it. Oh, well, he gave me a call a couple of weeks later and said, you know, we haven't got this all figured out. And he said, I really didn't mean that you were too old. What I was trying to say was we always hire people right out of law school. And we don't usually take people who have had experiences other places. And that's really what we were talking about. But we decided we should talk to you. And so they did. And they offered me a job, and I was there for 20 years, and it was very successful.
That's incredible.
But we've always joked about that. But the thing that I worried about was, you know, at that point I had 2 children. My son was in the 4th grade, and my daughter was 2 years old. And they had 3 women at Fulton, all single. And here I was person with a family. And I said to them, when they talked to me, I said, I can't work real long hours. I've got a family and I feel like I can't give my children short shrift, that I want to support them and I want to do things, with them and their experiences. And they said, okay, we'll give it a try. And so I knew that I would never be a great producer. In a law firm, historically, and I think still true, production means a lot.
Yeah.
So, and I knew that, and they knew that, and we decided to work together on that. And it was successful. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
That was the start.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, one of the things you mentioned that stuck out to me, and it seems like it might be a little detailed, but I'm really curious about it because I'm curious about the role it played in your story. You said you never learned to type.
That's right.
Why not?
Because I didn't want to be a secretary. And I just thought it wasn't anything I needed to learn. Now, I was really sorry a little later when we all got our own laptops, our own computers, and we had to type our first drafts of our briefs and all of that. And so I really worked hard. And, my son who was in a gifted program at College Hill, they learned to type on old-fashioned typewriters. And he's a lawyer, and he could type 170 words a minute. And he was amazing at doing briefs and doing research. He'd get on a computer and just, here I am.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
That was, I just wanted to be, I wanted to look different.
Well, that's so interesting. How many times do you think you got asked, like, hey, we're looking for somebody who has typing skills? When you were talking about those jobs that you were looking at, I just can't help but wonder.
Oh, yes.
Like how your
This was
life,
before I went to law school. Yes.
Yeah,
everybody
it might have been different.
I went, in fact, the first person I talked to when we were in DC looking for a job was my congressman. And he said, do you type? And I said, no. And he said, well, I don't have a job for you because everybody here has to type because what everybody does here is type letters to constituents. And I said, I want to go do research or something,
Right.
And so that was, it was always a problem. I talked to the telephone company in Washington, D.C., Chesapeake and Pacific it was then. It's all changed after AT&T and the government came to an agreement on how it was all going to work with telephone companies. And I talked to a woman and she said, we have a management training program for men. And this is in 1968. For men, she said, but we don't have for women, but I could direct hire you into a supervisor of telephone operators. And I got my back up and I said, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
So that's what I kept facing. So that's why the push to go to law school came finally.
Yeah, I really admire that. I was curious about that as you were talking about it, as you mentioned, like the number of times you were asked, like, do you have a particular skill? And I was assuming that people were asking because that's what they saw your value as somebody who could come in and do typing.
Well, that's what they thought women should do, teach school and type. I tried teaching school. I wasn't good at it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't type, so I was really sort of a lost soul.
You seem to have found a great place. And I'm so glad that you did. Just sitting here, I can't help but think about like the choices that you made. The choices to not do things. The choices to value, who you are and what your worth was, what your worth is, and not allow other people to define you based on what they valued. And what a difference that made. And kudos to you and thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I think hearing your story, there are so many opportunities there for you to have said, okay, fine. Like trying to box me into a place that I don't necessarily want to be. And, it is not always easy. And it takes some strength and courage of heart to say, nope, I don't want to be boxed in. Or I don't want to work at a company that's only escalating men in management and not focusing on doing the same thing for women. And instead, I'm going to find a different path. And it's because of decisions like those that, those paths start to exist for the women that are falling behind you. So I think even if at the time when you were making those choices, it's solely out of I'm not getting involved in that and I want better for myself or I want something different for myself, I think it likely makes and has probably made a lasting impact for sure. I had curious to talk about your entry into private practice at a law firm that has, you mentioned that there are women that practice here. So you weren't necessarily the first woman to practice, but that they were single. And your reception was good, at least upon your hiring, that said, we understand that you may not be the highest producer based on the schedule that you want to keep and prioritize your family. Did you find that as time went on, you stayed there for 20 years, so I think I know the answer to this question, but as time went on, that remained true, that you felt valued and appreciated and all of those things, even though you were contributing maybe in different ways or not producing at the level that others may have been producing at?
Yeah, I think so. I think law firms certainly really respect the people who bring in the business.
Sure.
And who bill lots of hours and receive, lots of compensation from clients because they're what make the firm continue
money.
to grow and money, right?
Gotta have it.
And give everybody a paycheck,
right?
But I knew that I would not be the highest compensated person in the firm because that was not where I was going, and so I never felt I was underpaid or anything like that. But
that's awesome.
But it worked, and I guess they even tolerated the fact that I was involved in the bar and that I was serving on boards and community boards, and so nobody ever said you can't do that or you should stop doing that or we need you to work more. We worked it out.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah, I think that's so important, even now, for law firms to hear, that you can get great. Go ahead.
No, I'm go ahead.
Yeah, that you can get great people to work with you and for you if we can be adaptable and be willing to meet people where they are and encourage their contributions both internally and externally in the community.
The interesting thing, and this was not true at Folston, but I went to a national program. Another attorney from Folston, Kathy Babcock, and I went to New York on women in the law, a big conference to talk about private practice and what was happening with women. This was, I'm trying to think when this was. I don't know, the late 80s or because at that point I think I was chairing the associates committee in the firm, and we went to hear what these women had to say. And the interesting part to me was that the women who didn't have families were the ones who were complaining the loudest about practice of law at that time.
Interesting.
Because they said what they looked at them in these law firms across the country as people who didn't have a personal life.
Yeah.
And so they gave them the jobs out in Timbuktu. They gave them this was their story. Now, I never saw it. I never validated it. And they felt like they were the ones at that point. Finally, women were accepted in law firms. It'd been in the 70s is when women just started getting into law firms. And then more and more women started going to law school, so that pretty soon the figures were, in those days, maybe 40% women, 60% men. Now it's more women than men, I think.
I saw that.
Because I've tried to follow the ABA studies and what they do. But they felt that they were being put upon mostly because nobody felt they had a life or they needed a life. You can go to so-and-so and be there over, for 3 weeks and do this and do that. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I guess I had some protection. I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
With my family.
Yeah, well, and had set some pretty clear boundaries that said this is a...
I'm not sure we made it that clear, but they could tell that's where I was.
They picked up on it.
Yeah, they picked up on it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's, probably a perspective that it certainly would be, different than if you're saying, I can't go for 3 weeks. I've got little kids at home who need my help. And your husband was working, your first husband at the time too, right? You were both working?
Professor at WSU.
A professor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm curious, was it difficult to kind of put those boundaries in place with Folston when you got started, saying, hey, this is what the expectations are. I'm not coming in to be your top producer, your top biller. Families, there's got to be enough balance, enough family time. Was that a difficult conversation or how was that?
I don't think there was really a conversation. We just kind of fell into that and did that.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I think there were times when I was concerned about it and they were concerned about me, that I'm sure. But nothing came of it.
Yeah.
And I always used to say to people, most of the lawyers at Folston are married, but very few of their wives have careers. Some of them work, but they don't see themselves in a career.
Right.
And so that this is a learning lesson for these people, in the 70s, that women want and have careers, and you've got to treat them a little differently than you thought you should.
Right.
And so that was something that, and I would say that to them. I say,
what was
they've got the support at home that I don't have quite.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think, those conversations are probably still happening on some level today. What was your experience, the reaction, I guess, to the legal community around you as you began to practice in private practice? And you said you joined and were involved in the bar. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, did you get a warm welcome from the Wichita bar?
From the bar, yes. There's certain attorneys who know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll turn off the cameras. You can name names.
We will hold it against them forever.
We're not doing that. We're keeping rolling.
Most of them are gone. So, but no, there were people who, I spent a lot of time with Fred Phelps because I did employment law. And at one point, he had 20% of the cases filed in federal court, civil rights cases filed in federal court. No. Civil cases filed in federal court in the state of Kansas. So I was working on cases from when I first started practicing law until he stopped practicing law with Phelps. Mm-hmm. And he would joke and he would say things, but most attorneys didn't do that.
Good.
Yeah. Good.
Were the regulatory agencies on the employment side that you were working with pretty well receptive to you appearing and working too?
Oh, sure.
Good.
Because, that's the first place women attorneys went to work was in the government.
The government. Yeah.
So they were used to seeing women attorneys in regulatory agencies.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you were successful enough at Folston, you were elected partner.
I was, yes.
That's amazing. I think that's so impressive. And so let's see, that's less than 10 years after you started, right? I'm bad at math.
They had at that time, they had a 5-year track.
Okay.
But they said they'd give me basically, I came to work in February and they said they'd count me with the people who started the year before.
Okay.
Unless I showed that I wasn't up to that.
Okay.
So I actually got to be partner in 4.5 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
On my birthday. It was really nice.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
exciting.
I think that's so cool. Did you have the opportunity or when you were working, what sort of things were you involved in the Wichita bar at that time? Was it still the same sort of thing or what were you, you're working and you have these children and this husband that's working.
I worked on this. One of the things I worked on early was the CLE committee because I can't remember what year that the state of Kansas decided we had to have continuing legal education was required. And so we had to get real formalized about, and I helped draft the initial documents we used for people getting credit and all of that stuff, you know. So
cool.
I did CLE committee early. I worked on the I don't know how these all fit into when the committee to start the was it the summer intern program? Yes, summer intern program.
Okay.
They were doing it in St. Louis, and they thought it'd be something we should do, and so I chaired the committee that put together the plan for a summer intern program here for high school students to learn about. And you know, the whole idea was to attract young women and minorities, you know, that and let them know that this is something they could do. They could be a lawyer, and let them see what law firms did. And it started out as a job, a summer job, and then the firms would let them off to go to programs that we put together to learn about the different aspects of the practice of law, whether it was the DA's office, go visit the jail, you know, just all the different things that you could do in law. We took 4 hours a week and had a program for the students. In fact, the first year we even had uniforms, if you can believe this. Nobody liked that. Kids didn't like it. We didn't like it. That's what they did in St. Louis, so we thought we would do it.
No, we need uniforms too.
Right away.
We're going to do our own thing here.
No uniforms in Wichita. I love it. I love it.
Great.
So,
Yeah. I'm just going to keep going. You just throw
No,
something
that's
at me.
great. I mean, I don't want to interrupt Awesome when it's in progress. So go for it.
Even during that, I mean, I've noticed through our conversation and listening to your bio, such a focus on elevating women and minorities in the practice of law throughout your career. And it's something that was really important to you and, something I both respect and share with you and have in common. And I am curious to sort of hear about from the moment, even before private practice, when you were working at Southwestern Bell, to sort of becoming a partner at one of the largest private law firm in Kansas. Did you see some of the barriers that women otherwise would face in the practice of law start to shift and break down
yes.
and get better? And in what ways were those?
Well, first of all, because there are so many more women.
Yeah.
And, the interesting part about it is, the first groups of women that came into the practice of law, set me aside, were pretty much overachievers. So they would go to work at a law firm and they would knock everybody's socks off.
Sure.
I worked with Kathy Babcock, who was the first woman at Folsom. Kathy could sit down and write a brief, and that was it. She wrote it. Didn't have to edit it. I mean, she was amazing.
Brilliant.
And everybody went to her for advice, because she knew the law. She was just a really, really bright woman.
Sure.
Me, I had to do a whole bunch of editing and go back and relook at things but I mean but the quality of the women that went in initially and went into law school initially they were always ended up near the top of their class, because it took some real gumption to do it.
Yeah.
But then it all leveled out, and so there were women who were really brilliant and did well, and there were women who did okay, just like there were men.
Sure.
Same.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
So that you saw that some people then didn't quite meet what they thought were the expectations because they were, she's a woman. She probably has all this experience and she doesn't,
Yeah.
whatever. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely shifts in just by making it more normal to see women in the practice of law, sort of allowed it not to just be those who, could devote everything that they had or, were the overachievers, but, to women with families or who wanted to practice law and also have a family.
But you also saw, and I can use my son as an example. I got a great story on him, but you also saw that the young men said, we want the same kind of deal, when they started law school and went going to work in firms. They didn't want to work, the really, really long hours either. And I think, I'm interested in what has happened in law firms because, in those days, everybody had a number, how many billable hours you're supposed to have a year.
Yeah.
And the big story was always that the big firms had 2,200 to 2,500 hours a year, which is
Kidney failure level.
well,
that's
I don't know how
burnout.
anybody got to that. It was. They were doing creative billing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they have more hours in the day than everybody else, I think.
I guess. And so that, then all of a sudden that there was pushback from the men saying, we want a life too.
Yeah.
So that my favorite story was when my son and his wife had their first child. I said, I want to come and help after the child's born. When do you go back? He said, well, when do you want to come, Mom? And I said, well, I'll wait till you go back to work. He said, oh, you don't want to wait that long. I'm taking 6 weeks off.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. Well, he worked for the government, but he took family leave. And I said, of course.
I love that.
No, that's great.
I have historically done attorney recruiting or worked with young lawyers and have told the men lawyers who are having babies that you too should have the opportunity to take the leave that's offered for the benefit of your family and your child. And I think it can sometimes be hard for men to make that choice. So I think, because they're like, what do you need to stay home for 6 weeks for?
But I see, I think women coming into the law has helped the men as well. I mean, everybody now understands that what you need for family time and how you want to be involved in your children's activities and et cetera. So. Yeah, I think so. The question is, are the firms up to speed on that? And I don't know the answer to that since I left Fulston in 2000. So, I can't really tell you what.
I'm curious, like as you, when you were in private practice and then as you were in-house counsel, over the course of that period, did you start to see shifting expectations and, shifting requirements as it related to people's ability to have an engaged family life?
I think so. I didn't, since I left so early, I think that people, or they make decisions on what they're going to do. I think, and regrettably, a lot of people leave firms and go in-house or take some other alternative type of opportunity thinking that it'll work better for them in their personal life.
Yeah.
Did you feel like there was a difference from being in private practice to being in-house when it came to things like, the workload and the hourly, not a billable sense, but the amount of time it was going to take, those expectations and how much margin that might have left for family?
Well, by the time I went to work at Boeing, and of course I started in a corporation, but by the time I went to Boeing, my children weren't at home, so
Sure.
I really didn't look at that. But maybe. But I think I don't care where people work, and whether it's government or in private, in corporations or in private practice, I think they feel the obligation to their client and they do the work, and so they work the hours.
Yeah.
It's really, that's really how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you feel like most of the pressure from availability, responsiveness, time pressure standpoint came from clients, or did it come from, senior attorneys or, law firm management? Because I think that's one of the things we've observed in our experiences is that there's lots of different pressures, some of it coming from, internal firm expectations, some of it coming from client expectations. But then I think there's a third factor that I think is maybe as strong as the other two and sometimes more so, which is the internal expectations. What attorneys think that, so is going to make, the managing partner happy or make the client happy, even when, it hasn't been asked for, it hasn't been expressed. And maybe, over time, some of those external pressures have changed, but I see that in myself a lot. And I see that in a lot of other attorneys is that I've got to get it by this point. I've got to offer to do it as quickly as I think I possibly can.
Right.
Rather than understanding what is the timing need that's going to create value.
I want to distinguish myself. I want to succeed.
Right.
I want to become a partner. I think that's always going to be there to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think it's been exacerbated because, when I went to Fulston, they had just started a system where they had, I can't remember now the name of the computers, where your secretary you could write out your brief and your secretary would type it, and then it would go into a pool. And the pool, it was a word processing system. They just had started a word processing system so that any editing and everything went to the pool who ran the word processing, after your first draft.
Yeah.
And because electronic typewriters, that's where we started and moved up. And now, everybody, the lawyers now are the typists generally.
Yep.
Because you type your brief on your computer, you don't write it out by hand. Mm-hmm. You do everything, and everybody expects immediate response to everything. Mm-hmm. It didn't used to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You get an email from the client in the middle of the night, they expect they're going to hear from you first thing in the morning, if not sooner than that. It used to be they'd call you and you'd say, well, let me see about that. And yes, I'll get a letter to you. And, you have a little slough time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The slough time is few and far between.
That's pretty much gone.
Yeah.
I like this by yesterday.
I was there. I watched it go. But that has really changed things so much because you really have to. They expect you to be responsive immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's been one of the hardest things culturally as a firm that we've had to do is to create better expectations around timing and deliverables and how we manage our work and how we manage expectations with clients so that we get our clients to have good expectations and then also to self-select out, like if they want something. Like we've started putting it in our engagement letters of like, hey, people don't work at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not going to respond to you then. If you need something that doesn't fit with our hours, let us know so that either somebody can accommodate it in advance or we can provide a referral.
Well, I have a daughter-in-law in San Francisco and she's still responding at all times.
Yeah.
She's a lawyer in San Francisco.
Yeah.
She's at it all the time.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is. It takes so much.
Yeah.
Both, trying to be intentional about setting those boundaries, but also, now when I can be sitting at home and my kids are talking to me and my email dings, it takes a lot of self-discipline for me not to pick it up and see what it is and automatically want to also deal with it. I like the instant gratification of saying, I've solved some problem and like I've gotten some work done and that feels good, while also balancing the need to be present, because it's, all right here all of the time and I'm always available. So something that you said before we have to wrap up, because I think it was so interesting, talking about when you started at Southwestern Bell and the woman who was she the secretary, the manager?
Head secretary,
Yeah, and she didn't think that...
It was just 3 lawyers. So
that women should practice law. And you mentioned
4.
sort of feeling the need then to be like, well, I better not mess this up. And I'm curious about, through the course of your career, whether that sort of pressure to say, I know, it hasn't always, women haven't always been allowed in these spaces or been given these opportunities. And I feel this additional pressure not to mess it up, or with time and experience that started to wane and you could feel less pressure about that.
Well, I think you feel pressure as a lawyer, man or woman, to not mess it up.
Yeah.
But there always was that concern. I remember working on a case when I was at Southwestern Bell. It was in Lawrence with a Lawrence lawyer from one of the best firms in Lawrence. It was a personal injury case. And he told me, he said, we hired a woman and her husband got a job in Texas and she left and went to Texas. So we'll probably not hire another one. And I'm going, oh my Lord.
Yeah. How dare she?
Yeah. She took the Texas bar and in Texas, they rank you. And I think she ranked at the top when she took the test. I mean, this woman was really bright. That's how she got a job in Lawrence at a law firm in the in the 70s.
But they said, burn me once, shame on me. Burn me twice.
Well, that firm has lots of women in it
Shame
now.
on
I just
women.
want you to know. But that was so there was always reaction. You always worried that you were going to do something. They'd say, never again.
Yeah. You don't want to be the one that they say, oh, we can't have a lady in here anymore. They're going to mess this whole thing up.
I saw some of that in the aircraft industry because there were just a couple of women, and not for me, a couple of women who were working in production. And there was one who was kind of feisty. And the CEO talked to me about her and said, she's just really hard to deal with. And I said, is she any harder to deal with than I named about 3 of the men? And he said, well, not really. I said, yeah. That's point.
What I thought.
That's what I thought. That's the point. Oh, yeah, he said. I see what you mean.
Yeah, okay. Point taken. Gloria, thank you. Yeah.
So,
awesome. I've got one question before our final question.
Okay.
As you're looking at, you've been really involved with like the Professional Diversity Committee and, other initiatives to really help improve the legal profession. As you look at other folks that are working on, trying to help our profession take those next steps forward, what kind of advice or encouragement or challenge would you give to folks?
Oh,
yeah.
That's a hard one. Women have been so successful, and I don't know why we can't do the same with minorities.
Yeah.
The excuse was for a long time was that if they're really good law students, they won't come to Wichita.
Yeah.
And there was some truth to that.
Yeah.
There was some truth to that. But but you got to make it attractive. You got to work to, and I really encourage that law firms got their own diversity committees and working on the programs. We need to see more results. But that's what you have to do. You really have to get in there and work on it.
Yeah.
And it's easy to talk about it. We before I was on the diversity committee, the bar developed the agreement, that firms sign. Yep. Some of them won't sign it, and then they signed it, and then we broadened it after I was on the diversity committee to include gay, lesbian, and then some of them wouldn't sign it because they had. And that's, again, the problem of being a partnership. You have partners who have feelings, and they said no.
Right.
And so you can't get past that. But we've made strides, but we've got a long way to go in that area.
Yeah.
We really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my advice, I think it's just keep working, because I don't know what else we can do.
I think that's good advice.
You got to be vigilant. You got to keep at it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much wisdom in that. And I even just look at some of the examples from, your career in the law and what has transpired during that time and what you've seen and been a part of. And like that, those 3 words, just do the work. Just mattered so much. Like, one of the things I wrote down was, you just had so many examples of people showing up in enough numbers, doing a great job, being great attorneys. And all of that matters, and all that makes a difference. And then you look back, I look at, those first examples that you had of your interactions with trying to find a job. And then I look at, like the people I've worked with, the people I see graduating right now, and I just see the differences. And I can't help but think that, the things that are occurring right now would not have been possible if people hadn't showed up and done the work and done it really, really well. And I think it's so necessary for people to understand like where we're at.
Well, we've gone backwards.
Yeah.
We really have in the diversity area. The whole country.
Yeah.
It's so upsetting.
Yeah.
What's happening and how people are reacting. And so we really have to keep fighting it.
Yeah.
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 So.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got to keep meeting people where they're at. And we've got to keep making space for people that, are different than us. Because there's so much opportunity, I think, to just keep making our profession a better place. and our community is a better place in the process.
Yeah.
My last question for you is kind of around this concept that we're working on about better law. There's a lot of people that talk about big law. We talk about the traditional approach to law. And we've identified some of the challenges, some of the things that just aren't working with, the traditional approach to law or what we see as a traditional approach to law. But we want to be a constructive part of the conversation and help people think about, establish for themselves, and sort of see and understand what a different alternative would be and put some language around it. And that's where we use the term better law. And I'm curious from your perspective, if you had sort of one thing to suggest that might be a part of better law as an idea, what might that be? Whether it's from a diversity and inclusion perspective, whether it's quality of life, or just really any aspect of, as you're thinking about, here's what you'd like to see as an ideal sort of state in the legal profession, what might that be?
Well, the only thing I can think of, and this probably doesn't get to your question. One of the things that happened quite a ways back I'd say in the 90s, is when corporations start saying, we want to know who you're going to have working on our cases because we want to see diversity. That's I think that's pulled back some.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of emphasis there. That's not on the topic, but I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
But I think, and I have no solution for this at all, but I think that people need to figure out ways that law firms can bill for work that isn't on an hourly basis. Some have, they do a number, they figure out what it really costs to do this kind of work, and set a number up front. You want to
like a flat
set
fee.
up a new corporation, and you want this at this, and this is the fee it will cost. Now, if we run into any really initial, any serious issues, et cetera, we're going to have to negotiate an additional cost. But I don't see that movement, at least as long as I was out there. I didn't see that movement working very much.
Yeah, no, I think
big law probably wouldn't move that. They'd have in some things.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of resistance to that. I see some progress in that front, but I really like that as an addition because I feel like so much of how we've decided our self-worth as attorneys is based on our billable hours, which at the end of the day, I can't cash billable hours. Like I tried once at my bank and they looked at me and they were like,
but I had 1,800 billable hours last year. What do you mean I can't get this home loan?
Like, this is not legal tender, Sam.
Right. Right. You cannot.
But I think that's a really great suggestion.
Me too.
I really like
I think it's out there. They've talked about it. The ABA's talked about it a little bit.
Figuring out how to take the pressure off of the billable hour, I think would relieve a lot of the disparity that we see in the actual practice for sure. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. No, that's great.
But I'm sure there's lots of other things you've got to do, but and in Wichita we still have, I think, there's still a relationship between attorney and client in most situations, even when it's a corporate client. They work really hard at that. And of course that may not be so true in big cities when they can walk down the street and go find somebody else.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're where those people are.
Right. Yeah.
But attorneys do go look for other options all the time. They go in-house. I went in-house.
Yeah.
They do lots of different things.
Yeah.
Mostly to get away from keeping
the billable hour.
That's right.
The almighty billable
Precisely.
hour.
That about sums it up.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for, just all of the decisions that you made. To choose to be yourself and to put in the work, to to build a spectacular legal career.
Oh,
and to,
you exaggerate.
I do not. I mean, I really appreciate it. I mean, you've been an inspiration to me and inspiration to so many others. Thank you.
Yeah.
That didn't happen on accident. And I know that took a lot of hard work, and that you had to make a lot of uncomfortable choices at times when other people were choosing the easy path. They were choosing to type because of the circumstances they were in. And you chose differently, and I'm really grateful that you did.
Me too.
So thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah. Listeners, we're so excited that you joined us for another episode. We'll be back with some more content here over the next couple of weeks. Thank you for joining us. Please consider following our podcast, subscribing. If you like the content, please give us a positive rating. If you don't like the content, please send us a private message. Or leave us a 1-star review.
So
Those
we can promptly
really funny. But
delete it.
If you're going to leave us a 1-star review, please leave really, really entertaining feedback, because that would bless my heart. So thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.